The summer heat in Phoenix was murderous that August afternoon. At 115 degrees, the asphalt shimmered like liquid mercury, and most residents had retreated inside to their air-conditioned sanctuaries. But 3-year-old Emma Rodriguez didn't mind the heat. She sat on her grandmother's driveway, her tiny fingers clutching pink and blue chalk, drawing what she insisted were butterflies and unicorns, though they looked more like colorful scribbles to anyone else. "Abuela, look," Emma called out, her voice carrying that pure, unself-conscious joy that only small children possess. She held up her chalk-covered hands, grinning with pride at her latest masterpiece. A crooked circle she declared was the sun. Elena Rodriguez, Emma's grandmother, smiled from the doorway of her modest ranch-style home in the quiet suburban neighborhood of Maryvale. At 63, Elena had raised 4 children of her own and was now helping her daughter Maria raise Emma, while Maria worked double shifts as a nurse at Phoenix General Hospital. Elena watched her granddaughter for a moment, her heart swelling with love, before stepping back inside. "I'll be right back, Mija," she called. "Abuela needs to answer the phone." The house phone was ringing insistently from the kitchen. Elena hurried inside, leaving the front door open so she could still hear Emma playing. It was her sister calling from Tucson, and Elena picked up the receiver, keeping the conversation brief. "Rosa, I can't talk long. I'm watching Emma," Elena said, glancing toward the open door. "Just 1 minute, Hermana. I need to ask you about Mama's birthday party next week." 90 seconds. That's all it took. 90 seconds for Elena's world to shatter into a million pieces. When she walked back outside, still holding the cordless phone, the driveway was empty. The chalk was there, scattered pieces of pink, blue, and yellow against the gray concrete. Emma's drawing was there, the crooked sun smiling up at the sky. Even her little purple sandals were there, kicked off because she preferred to feel the warm concrete under her bare feet. But Emma was gone. "Emma," Elena called, her voice uncertain. "Emma, baby, where are you?" "Nothing." "Emma," this time her voice cracked with panic. She dropped the phone, hearing her sister's distant voice asking what was wrong. Elena ran down the driveway, looking left and right down the quiet street. "Emma, Emma, this isn't funny." Her neighbor, Mr. Peterson, was watering his brown lawn across the street. "Elena, what's wrong?" "Emma, have you seen Emma? She was just here." Elena's hands were shaking, her breath coming in short gasps. "I haven't seen her. I just came outside 2 minutes ago." 2 minutes? The timeline was devastating. Elena ran back to her house, checking every room, every closet, under every bed, though she knew Emma had been outside. She tore through the small backyard, checked the shed, screamed Emma's name until her throat was raw. By the time she grabbed her phone to call 911, 10 minutes had passed. 10 minutes that felt like 10 hours. 10 minutes that would haunt her for the rest of her life. The 911 operator's voice was calm, professional. "Ma'am, I need you to take a deep breath. When did you last see Emma?" "She was drawing with chalk. I came inside for just a moment. She's 3 years old. Someone took my baby." Elena was sobbing now, barely coherent. "Officers are on their way. Stay on the line with me. I need you to describe what Emma was wearing." Within 8 minutes, 3 patrol cars screeched to a stop in front of Elena's house. Within 15 minutes, Detective Sarah Mitchell arrived, her unmarked sedan joining the growing fleet of emergency vehicles. By 20 minutes, the entire block was cordoned off with yellow tape, and K-9 units were being deployed. Detective Mitchell, a 15-year veteran with the Phoenix PD, had seen her share of missing children cases. Most ended well. Kids wandered off, got distracted, fell asleep in strange places. But there was something about this one that made her stomach clench with dread. Maybe it was how quickly the child had vanished. Maybe it was the abandoned chalk and shoes. Maybe it was the look of absolute terror in Elena Rodriguez's eyes. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I need you to focus for me," Mitchell said gently, guiding Elena to sit on the front steps. "You said you were inside for 90 seconds. Yes, maybe less. My sister called, I answered, I told her I couldn't talk. That's all. Alina's hands clutched at Mitchell's arm. Please, you have to find her, please. We will do everything we can. Does Emma know not to talk to strangers? Yes, Maria taught her. She's a smart girl, she wouldn't just go with someone. Alina's voice trailed off as the horrible implications sank in. That's when Officer Jake Harrison pulled up with Rex, his K-9 partner. The German Shepherd jumped from the vehicle, alert and ready. Harrison grabbed Emma's stuffed rabbit from Alina's trembling hands, the one Emma slept with every night, and let Rex get the scent. Mitchell checked her watch. 4:37 p.m. Emma had been missing for 50 minutes now. She looked up at the blazing Arizona sun, knowing that if Emma was outside in this heat, they had very little time. She radioed for the Amber Alert to be activated immediately. At Phoenix General Hospital, Maria Rodriguez was checking a patient's IV when her supervisor appeared in the doorway, face pale. Maria, you need to come with me. Now. What? I'm in the middle of. It's Emma. Maria's legs gave out. She knew before anyone said the words. Every parent's worst nightmare, the fear that lived in the back of every mind, had just become her reality. By the time she reached her mother's house, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in cruel, beautiful shades of orange and red. Emma had been missing for 3 hours. Detective Mitchell met her in the driveway, where Emma's chalk drawings were now marked with evidence markers. Mrs. Rodriguez, we're doing everything possible. We have every available officer searching. The FBI is being notified. We will find your daughter. But as night fell over Phoenix, as the temperature finally dropped below 100 degrees, one terrifying fact remained. Emma Rodriguez had vanished without a trace, and somewhere out there, in the darkness of the desert city, a 3-year-old child was in the hands of a monster. The clock was ticking, and everyone knew it. Officer Jake Harrison had been partnered with Rex for 4 years, and in that time they'd become something more than handler and K-9. They were brothers in arms. Rex, a 5-year-old German Shepherd from Czech Republic bloodlines, had the finest nose in the Phoenix Police Department. His record spoke for itself. 37 missing persons found, countless drug busts, 2 armed suspects apprehended. But as Harrison watched Rex circle Alina Rodriguez's driveway for the 3rd time that evening, he felt something he'd never experienced before: doubt. "Come on, boy. You can do this," Harrison whispered, though he wasn't sure if he was reassuring Rex or himself. The problem was the heat. At 8 p.m., the temperature had finally dropped to 98 degrees, but the damage was done. Scent trails degraded rapidly in extreme heat, the molecular compounds breaking down and dispersing. Add to that the fact that Emma had been barefoot, leaving minimal trace evidence, and they were working with almost nothing. Rex had picked up Emma's scent from the stuffed rabbit, circling it several times to lock it into his memory. Then he'd moved methodically across the driveway, his nose working overtime. He tracked to the curb, then stopped abruptly, circling in confusion. The scent went cold. It meant one thing: Emma had been taken in a vehicle. "Vehicle abduction," Harrison reported grimly to Detective Mitchell. "The trail ends at the street." Mitchell's jaw tightened. She'd feared as much. They'd already pulled security footage from the few cameras in the neighborhood. One grainy image showed a white van, make and model unclear, slowing down near Alina's house at 3:47 p.m. Then nothing. No license plate, no clear view of the driver. Whoever had taken Emma had known exactly where the camera blind spots were. "We need to expand the search radius," Mitchell said. "If someone took her in a vehicle, they could be anywhere by now." But Harrison shook his head. Most abductors don't go far initially. They find somewhere close, somewhere they feel safe. Let me take Rex out in a grid pattern, hit all the abandoned buildings within a 5-mile radius. It was a long shot, and everyone knew it. 5 miles in Phoenix meant hundreds of potential locations: abandoned strip malls, foreclosed homes, empty warehouses. but it was all they had. As midnight approached, Harrison loaded Rex back into the K-9 unit and began the systematic search. Mitchell had compiled a list of every vacant property in the area, prioritizing those owned by registered sex offenders or with previous criminal complaints. Harrison's radio crackled constantly with updates, all of them dead ends. Unit 47, nothing at the Henderson property. Unit 52, warehouse on McDowell clear. Unit 33, storage facility on 67th Avenue is locked up tight. Hasn't been accessed in months according to the manager. Hour after hour, Rex worked tirelessly. They checked an abandoned school where homeless people sometimes sheltered. Nothing. They searched a condemned apartment complex scheduled for demolition. Empty. They investigated a shuttered auto repair shop where the owner had skipped town owing back taxes. Just broken glass and graffiti. By 3 a.m., Harrison's hands were shaking from exhaustion and too much coffee. Rex's paws were bleeding from the hot pavement, and Harrison had wrapped them in protective booties, but the dog refused to slow down. It was as if Rex understood the stakes, understood that somewhere out there, a little girl was running out of time. "Jake, you need to rest," Mitchell's voice came through the radio. "We've got fresh K-9 teams coming in at dawn. You and Rex have been at this for 11 hours. "Negative," Harrison responded, his voice hoarse. "Rex still has search in him. We're continuing." The truth was, Harrison couldn't stop. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Emma's face from the photographs Maria Rodriguez had provided. That bright smile, those trusting brown eyes. He had a daughter of his own, Katie, who was 5. The thought of someone taking her, hurting her, made him physically ill. Day 2 brought new horrors. The temperature climbed back to 112 degrees. Media helicopters circled overhead. Volunteers numbering in the hundreds combed through the desert on foot, but there was still no sign of Emma Rodriguez. Rex was flagging now. Harrison could see it in the way his tail drooped, the way his steps had lost their usual spring. They'd been searching for 26 hours straight, taking only brief water breaks. Harrison's captain ordered him to stand down, but Harrison pleaded for 6 more hours, just 6 more. "She's out there, Captain, I know she is. Rex knows it too." Day 3 arrived like a death sentence. 72 hours since Emma's disappearance. Harrison knew the statistics. After 72 hours, the chances of finding a missing child alive dropped to nearly 0. He sat in his K-9 unit in a McDonald's parking lot, feeding Rex a hamburger patty, both of them exhausted beyond measure. His phone rang. Detective Mitchell. "Jake, we've got something. Remember that storage facility on 67th Avenue? The one that checked out clean on day 1. "Yeah." Uniform patrol just noticed fresh tire tracks in the dust near the back entrance. Someone's been there recently. The manager swears nobody has access, but something feels off. Harrison was already starting the engine. "We're 10 minutes out." "Jake, wait for backup, if someone's there." But Harrison had already disconnected. He looked at Rex in the rearview mirror. The dog's ears were up, alert, as if he sensed they were close. "One more stop, buddy, just one more." The storage facility loomed against the dawn sky, a sprawling complex of corrugated metal buildings baking in the desert sun. The manager met them at the gate, keys jangling nervously. "I told the police, nobody's been here. The only units rented are on the north side, and I checked them all myself." "Show me the back entrance," Harrison said. They walked through rows of identical orange doors, all padlocked. The place smelled of hot metal and dust. Harrison was about to give up when Rex suddenly stopped, his entire body going rigid. The dog's nose worked the air frantically. Then he pulled hard on the leash, dragging Harrison toward a unit in the far corner, Unit 247. The padlock looked rusty, untouched, but Rex was going crazy, barking, scratching at the metal door. "I'm telling you, that unit hasn't been accessed in over a year," the manager insisted. The renter stopped paying. We're scheduled to auction off the contents next month. Harrison wasn't listening. He radioed for backup, then turned to the manager. Open it, now. The manager fumbled with a master key, his hands shaking. The lock clicked open with a sound that seemed to echo forever. Harrison pulled the rolling door up, and the smell hit him immediately. Urine, sweat, fear. Inside the dark unit, behind boxes of junk and an old freezer, was a door that shouldn't have been there. Someone had constructed a hidden room inside the storage unit. Harrison's heart hammered as he approached. The door was locked from the outside with a simple deadbolt. With Mitchell's voice screaming through his radio to wait for backup, Harrison threw the bolt and yanked the door open. The room inside was dark, cold. Someone had rigged the air conditioning to run only in this hidden space. And there, curled in the corner on a filthy mattress, was Emma Rodriguez. Emma, Harrison dropped to his knees beside her. She was breathing shallow, rapid breaths, but alive. Her lips were cracked and bleeding from dehydration. Her clothes were torn, but she was alive. Rex pushed past Harrison, gently licking Emma's face. The little girl's eyes fluttered open for just a moment, unfocused and terrified, before closing again. I need paramedics now, Harrison shouted into his radio, cradling Emma carefully. I've got her. She's alive. She's alive. Behind him, the manager was babbling about how this was impossible, how no one had access. Harrison barely heard him, because coming up the gravel drive was a white van, and the driver, a man in his 40s with dead eyes, saw the police vehicles and tried to reverse. He didn't make it 20 feet before patrol cars blocked him in. Robert Crane, age 42, registered sex offender, was taken into custody without incident. He didn't say a word, didn't ask for a lawyer, just stared straight ahead with those empty, soulless eyes. But as paramedics rushed Emma to the ambulance, as Harrison held Rex close and whispered, "Good boy, such a good boy," they all knew the same terrible truth. Emma Rodriguez had been found alive. But what had been done to her in those 72 hours would ensure she might never truly live again. Phoenix General Hospital's pediatric wing had never felt so heavy with grief. Emma Rodriguez lay in room 304, hooked up to IV fluids, her tiny body swallowed by the white hospital sheets. Medical staff had worked through the night to stabilize her. She was severely dehydrated, malnourished, and showed signs of physical trauma that made even veteran nurses step out of the room to compose themselves before continuing their work. But it was the silence that terrified everyone most. Emma hadn't spoken a single word since Officer Harrison found her in that storage unit. Not when the paramedics lifted her onto the stretcher. Not when doctors examined her injuries. Not when her mother, Maria, had burst into the emergency room, collapsed beside her daughter's bed, and sobbed her name over and over. Emma's eyes remained open but vacant, staring at nothing, seeing everything and nothing at once. Dr. Rachel Patel, the hospital's chief pediatric psychiatrist, sat beside Emma's bed on the second day, speaking in gentle tones. "Emma, sweetheart, can you hear me? You're safe now. Nobody's going to hurt you anymore." Nothing, not even a blink of acknowledgement. Maria sat on the opposite side of the bed, holding her daughter's small hand, her own hand still trembling from 48 hours of barely contained panic. "Please, baby, please say something. Say anything. Mama's here. You're safe now." Emma stared at the ceiling, her breathing steady but her mind somewhere far away, locked behind walls that trauma had built in self-defense. Dr. Patel pulled Maria into the hallway, her expression grave. "Mrs. Rodriguez, what Emma is experiencing is called traumatic mutism. It's a dissociative response to severe psychological trauma. Her mind is protecting her from memories too painful to process." "But she'll talk again, right? She'll get better." Maria's voice cracked with desperation. "In time, with proper therapy, many children do recover. But I can't give you a timeline. It could be days, weeks, months, or longer. Every child is different. What Emma experienced in those 72 hours, Dr. Patel paused, choosing her words carefully. It was enough to make her mind retreat somewhere she feels safe, and right now that safe place is silence. 3 floors below, in a conference room that smelled of stale coffee and desperation, prosecutor Amanda Stevens was facing a nightmare of a different kind. She sat across from Detective Mitchell, FBI Special Agent Carson Reeves, and the district attorney himself, David Thornton, staring at a case file that should have been a slam dunk but was rapidly falling apart. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," DA Thornton said, his voice tight with frustration. "We have a 3-year-old victim who cannot speak. We have physical evidence of imprisonment and assault. We have Robert Crane arrested at the scene, but his lawyer is claiming what exactly?" Stevens flipped open her legal pad, her handwriting angry and sharp. "Marcus Webb is arguing that Crane discovered Emma in that storage unit just like we did. He claims he rented the unit years ago, abandoned it when he couldn't pay, and had no idea someone else had constructed that hidden room. He says he came back to retrieve some old belongings and was about to call police when we arrived." "That's absurd," Mitchell slammed her hand on the table. "The DNA evidence will take weeks to process, and even then his DNA being present proves nothing if he claims he found her there," Stevens interrupted. "We need Emma's testimony. We need her to identify him as her abductor. Without that, a good defense attorney, and Marcus Webb is one of the best, can create reasonable doubt." Agent Reeves leaned forward, his FBI experience evident in his measured tone. "What about the security footage from the neighborhood, the white van?" "Grainy, inconclusive. We can't definitively prove that's Crane's van or that Emma is inside it. Webb will argue it could be anyone's vehicle," Stevens said, feeling her case crumbling like sand through her fingers. DA Thornton stood, packing the small room. "So you're telling me that this monster, this registered sex offender who violated his parole conditions, who we found at a storage unit where a kidnapped child was being held prisoner, might walk free?" "Not walk free," Stevens clarified. "We can charge him with parole violations, maybe get him 18 months. But the kidnapping charges, the assault charges, the ones that would put him away for life, those require Emma's testimony." The room fell silent, everyone understanding the horrific irony. Emma Rodriguez had survived 3 days of hell, but her survival might not be enough for justice. Meanwhile, in the county jail, Robert Crane sat in his cell with an expression of smug satisfaction. His court-appointed lawyer had been replaced within hours by Marcus Webb, one of Phoenix's most notorious defense attorneys, known for getting guilty clients acquitted on technicalities. Crane knew exactly how this would play out. He'd been careful, so careful. Gloves, no fingerprints where they mattered. The storage unit rented under a fake name years ago, the rent allowed to lapse. The hidden room constructed by someone he'd hired off the books now conveniently disappeared. And most importantly, his victim was a 3-year-old child so traumatized she'd likely never speak his name. When Webb visited him that afternoon, sliding a legal pad across the metal table in the visiting room, Crane almost smiled. "They have nothing," Webb said confidently. "The child can't testify. The physical evidence is circumstantial. The DNA will show you were in that room, but you'll testify you entered it briefly when you discovered the child, tried to help her, went to get your phone to call 911 when police arrived. Self-defense through confusion." "What are my chances?" Crane asked, his voice devoid of emotion. Webb tapped his expensive pen against the pad. "If that little girl doesn't talk, 70-30 in your favor. Maybe better. Stevens is a good prosecutor, but she's working with nothing. And even if she pushes forward, no jury will convict based solely on circumstantial evidence when there's a plausible alternative explanation." Back in room 304, Dr. Patel was trying a new approach. She'd brought in stuffed animals, coloring books, play therapy dolls. anything to help Emma express what words couldn't. But Emma simply stared, her small hands limp in her lap, her mind locked away in that silent fortress. Maria watched through tears as specialist after specialist tried and failed to reach her daughter. Child psychologists, trauma counselors, even a pediatric neurologist to rule out physical damage to her speech centers. Nothing worked. "She's in there," Maria whispered to Dr. Patel. "I can see it in her eyes sometimes, just for a second. My baby is in there, trapped." "I know," Dr. Patel said softly, "and we'll keep trying. We won't give up on her." But as visiting hours ended and Maria was forced to leave her daughter for the night, as Emma lay in that hospital bed staring at shadows on the ceiling, as Robert Crane slept peacefully in his cell confident in his coming freedom, everyone understood the same devastating truth. Sometimes the cruelest prisons aren't made of concrete and steel. Sometimes they're made of silence. And sometimes monsters walk free, because their victims' screams can only be heard in nightmares. The trial was set for 6 weeks away. And nobody knew if Emma Rodriguez would ever speak again. Dr. Linda Chen had been a child trauma specialist for 17 years, and in that time, she'd seen horrors that would break most people. Abused children, neglected toddlers, victims of unspeakable violence. She'd guided hundreds through their darkest moments. But Emma Rodriguez's case haunted her in ways she couldn't quite explain. Maybe it was the silence, that absolute, impenetrable silence. Dr. Chen had taken over Emma's care after Dr. Patel requested a specialist with specific experience in childhood trauma cases involving sexual assault. For 3 weeks, Dr. Chen had tried everything in her therapeutic arsenal. Art therapy, where Emma would hold crayons but never draw. Play therapy with dolls, which Emma wouldn't touch. Even music therapy, playing soft lullabies while encouraging any response at all. Nothing worked. Emma existed in a state of wakeful catatonia, her eyes open but her mind locked away somewhere unreachable. Then came the day that changed everything. It was Officer Jake Harrison's idea, really. He'd stopped by the hospital on his day off, wanting to check on the little girl he'd found in that storage unit. He hadn't been able to sleep since the rescue, nightmares of arriving 5 minutes too late plaguing him every night. When he asked if he could visit Emma, Dr. Chen had been skeptical but allowed it. "I'd like to bring Rex if that's okay," Harrison had said. "Sometimes K9s have a calming effect on trauma victims. I've seen it before with adults." Dr. Chen had agreed, mostly because nothing else was working. She'd watched through the observation window as Harrison entered Emma's room with Rex at his side. The German Shepherd, still wearing his official K9 vest, moved slowly, carefully, as if he understood he was in the presence of something fragile. What happened next made Dr. Chen's breath catch in her throat. Emma's eyes, those vacant, distant eyes, had tracked Rex's movement across the room. It was the first time in 3 weeks that Emma had shown awareness of her surroundings. When Rex approached her bed, moving with infinite gentleness, Emma's hand had lifted slightly from the white sheets. Her fingers, small and trembling, had touched Rex's fur. And then, miracle of miracles, the corner of Emma's mouth had moved. Not quite a smile, but something. A flicker of recognition, of connection, of presence. Rex had remained perfectly still for 5 minutes while Emma's hand rested on his head, and Dr. Chen had watched with tears streaming down her face as this broken child showed the first sign of life since her rescue. When Harrison and Rex left, Emma had retreated back into silence, but Dr. Chen had seen what she needed to see. Somewhere inside that traumatized mind, Emma Rodriguez was still there, and Rex had found a way to reach her, even if just for a moment. That night, Dr. Chen reviewed the security footage obsessively, watching that 5-minute interaction again and again. Then she began researching, diving into medical journals and legal precedents. What she discovered both excited and terrified her. There were cases, rare but documented, of therapy animals being allowed in courtrooms, mostly dogs providing comfort to victims during testimony, but never in a case quite like this. Never with a police K9. Never with a 3-year-old who couldn't speak. Dr. Chen spent the next week building her case. She compiled research on animal-assisted therapy, documented Emma's response to Rex, consulted with colleagues across the country who specialized in pediatric trauma. She prepared psychological evaluations, expert testimonies, and a detailed proposal that she knew was going to sound absolutely insane. Then she requested a meeting with Judge Patricia Holbrook. Judge Holbrook's chambers were intimidating, mahogany furniture, law books lining every wall, and the stern-faced judge herself sitting behind a massive desk that seemed designed to make visitors feel small. Prosecutor Amanda Stevens sat to Dr. Chen's left, having agreed to support the motion. To her right, predictably, sat defense attorney Marcus Webb, his expression one of barely concealed amusement. "Dr. Chen," Judge Holbrook began, removing her reading glasses, "I've reviewed your proposal. You want to bring a police dog, a German Shepherd, into my courtroom during a criminal trial." "Yes, Your Honor. Specifically, I want Rex present during Emma Rodriguez's testimony." Webb actually laughed. "Your Honor, this is absurd. We're talking about a courtroom, not a petting zoo. This is a serious criminal proceeding." "Mr. Webb," Judge Holbrook's voice cut through his objection like a knife, "I'll decide what is and isn't appropriate in my courtroom. Dr. Chen, continue." Dr. Chen pulled out her tablet displaying the security footage from the hospital. "Your Honor, Emma Rodriguez has not spoken a single word in 4 weeks. Not to her mother, not to therapists, not to anyone. She exists in a state of traumatic dissociation that, frankly, may never resolve. Without her testimony, this case falls apart." Stevens leaned forward. "Your Honor, we have physical evidence, but the defense has crafted a narrative that creates reasonable doubt. Emma is our only witness to what actually happened in that storage unit. If she can't testify, Robert Crane may walk free." Webb's smile faded slightly. He knew Stevens was right. Dr. Chen continued, showing the footage of Emma touching Rex's fur. "This is the only response we've gotten from Emma in a month. The only sign that she's still in there, still capable of connecting with the world. K9 officer Rex found Emma when she was missing. In her mind, he represents safety, rescue, hope. If there's any chance of Emma finding her voice again, it's with Rex beside her." Judge Holbrook watched the footage, her expression unreadable. She was a grandmother herself, 3 grandchildren, ages 4, 7, and 9. She'd been a judge for 23 years, had presided over hundreds of cases, always followed the letter of the law. But she'd also watched the news coverage of Emma's disappearance. She'd seen the photos of that storage unit, that hidden room. She'd read the medical reports that made her stomach turn. "Dr. Chen, what you're proposing is highly irregular," the judge said carefully. "There are concerns about courtroom decorum, potential bias, the precedent this would set." "I understand, Your Honor, but this isn't about precedent. It's about giving a 3-year-old child a chance at justice, a chance at finding her voice." Dr. Chen's hands trembled slightly as she spoke. "Without Rex, Emma will sit in that courtroom in silence and a child predator will go free. With Rex, we might be able to reach her." Webb stood abruptly. "Your Honor, I strenuously object. This is nothing more than a theatrical stunt designed to manipulate the jury's emotions. A cute dog next to a traumatized child. It's prejudicial." "Everything about this case is prejudicial, Mr. Webb," Stevens shot back. "Your client was found at the scene where a kidnapped child was imprisoned. The only question is whether that child can tell us what happened." Judge Holbrook held up her hand for silence. She stood, walking to her window that overlooked downtown Phoenix. The city sprawled beneath her, millions of people going about their lives, unaware that in this room, a decision was being made that would determine whether a monster faced justice or walked free. She thought about her own grandchildren, about Emma Rodriguez, who should be learning her ABCs and playing with dolls, but instead sat in traumatized silence, about the letter of the law versus the spirit of justice. Finally, she turned back to face them. "I'm going to allow it," she said quietly. K-9 Officer Rex will be permitted in the courtroom during Emma Rodriguez's testimony under strict conditions. He remains on a leash, controlled by Officer Harrison at all times. He stays in a designated area near the witness stand. And Dr. Chen, if this doesn't work, if Emma cannot or will not testify even with the dog present, we're done. No delays, no continuances. Understood? Dr. Chen nodded, her heart pounding. Understood, Your Honor. Webb's face had gone red. Your Honor, I'll be filing an immediate appeal. File whatever you want, Mr. Webb. But in my courtroom, we're going to give this child every possible chance to be heard. Trial begins November 14th. This meeting is adjourned. As they filed out of the judge's chambers, Dr. Chen's hands were shaking. She'd gotten her miracle approval, but now the real pressure began. Because if this didn't work, if Emma remained silent even with Rex beside her, Robert Crane would walk free. And a little girl's last chance at justice would die in that silence. The trial was 3 weeks away. The whole world would be watching. And nobody knew if a 3-year-old and a police dog could accomplish what the entire legal system could not. November 14th arrived cold and gray, unusual for Phoenix. Dark clouds hung over the Maricopa County Superior Court building like an omen, and by 6 a.m. the media circus had already begun. News vans from every major network lined the streets. CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, even international outlets from the BBC and CBC. Satellite dishes pointed toward the sky like mechanical flowers seeking sun, ready to broadcast what was being called the trial of the decade. Reporters jockeyed for position on the courthouse steps, their voices creating a wall of noise that echoed off the concrete and glass. Unprecedented decision by Judge Holbrook to allow a police K-9 in the courtroom. 3-year-old Emma Rodriguez, who hasn't spoken since her rescue 5 weeks ago. Legal experts calling this either brilliant innovation or dangerous precedent. Amanda Stevens arrived at 7 a.m., 2 hours before the trial was set to begin, and had to push through a crush of reporters shouting questions. She ignored them all, her mind focused on the impossible task ahead. In her briefcase were her opening arguments, her witness list, her evidence folders. But she knew none of it mattered as much as what would happen when Emma Rodriguez took the stand. If she took the stand. Inside the courthouse, security had been tripled. Metal detectors beeped constantly as spectators filed through, everyone from concerned citizens to true crime podcasters hopping to witness history. The victim advocacy groups had mobilized, dozens of people wearing purple ribbons pinned to their shirts, the color representing child abuse awareness. Some held signs, "Justice for Emma, protect our children, believe survivors." On the opposite side of the spectrum, civil liberties groups had shown up too, protesting what they called courtroom theater and emotional manipulation of the jury process. The tension between the two groups crackled in the air like electricity before a storm. Courtroom 6B had been selected specifically for this trial, the largest in the building, with capacity for over 200 spectators in the gallery. By 8 a.m., every seat was filled. The overflow crowd watched from monitors set up in adjacent rooms. Judge Holbrook had ruled that cameras would be allowed to record the proceedings, with Emma's face to be blurred in any broadcast, a concession that satisfied media demands while protecting the child. The jury had been selected over 3 grueling weeks, 12 citizens and 4 alternates, their faces carefully neutral as they filed into the jury box. Juror number 7, a grandmother of 5 named Patricia Simmons, clutched a tissue in her hand. She'd already been crying and the trial hadn't even started. At 8:30 a.m., Robert Crane was led into the courtroom. The silence that fell was deafening. Crane wore an expensive charcoal suit that his lawyer, Marcus Webb, had undoubtedly selected to make him look respectable, almost professional. At 42, Crane was average height, average build, with thinning brown hair and unremarkable features, the kind of man who could disappear into a crowd. His face showed no emotion as he sat at the defense table, not anger, not fear, not remorse. Just an unsettling blankness, like looking into the eyes of a shark. Webb sat beside him, confident and polished in his $1,000 suit, organizing his files with practiced precision. He defended 3 accused child predators in the past 5 years and gotten 2 acquitted. He knew exactly what he was doing. Maria Rodriguez sat in the front row of the gallery, directly behind the prosecution table. She'd aged a decade in 5 weeks, her eyes sunken with sleepless nights, her hands never still, always fidgeting with her rosary beads. Her mother, Elena, sat beside her, both women linked by grief and desperate hope. Officer Jake Harrison arrived at 8:45 with Rex, using a side entrance to avoid the media. The German Shepherd wore his official K9 vest, freshly brushed and groomed, his dark eyes alert and intelligent. Harrison had spent the past 3 weeks preparing for this moment, working with Dr. Chen to acclimate Rex to courtroom environments, practicing the specific positioning they'd use during Emma's testimony. "You ready, boy?" Harrison whispered, scratching behind Rex's ears. The dog's tail wagged once, calm and professional. He'd done his job finding Emma. Now he had to do it again, find her voice in the silence. Dr. Linda Chen sat at the prosecution table beside Stevens, her role officially listed as expert witness and child advocate. Unofficially, she was Emma's lifeline, the only person besides Maria who Emma had shown any response to in recent weeks. The weight of responsibility sat heavy on her shoulders. She'd convinced Judge Holbrook to take this unprecedented step. If it failed, it was on her. At exactly 9 a.m., the bailiff stood. "All rise. The Superior Court of Arizona, Maricopa County, is now in session, the Honorable Patricia Holbrook presiding." Judge Holbrook entered, her black robes flowing, her expression stern and controlled. She'd barely slept in 3 days, reviewing legal precedents, consulting with child psychology experts, second-guessing her decision to allow Rex in her courtroom. But as she took her seat at the bench and looked out over the packed courtroom, she felt a strange sense of certainty. "Please be seated," she said, her voice carrying authority. "We are here today in the matter of the state of Arizona versus Robert James Crane. Mr. Crane is charged with kidnapping in the 1st degree, aggravated assault on a minor, unlawful imprisonment, and multiple counts of child abuse. This is a preliminary hearing to determine if there is sufficient cause to proceed to full trial." She paused, looking directly at the jury. "What you are about to witness today is highly unusual. I have made the decision to allow a certified K9 officer to be present during testimony from a minor witness who has experienced severe trauma. This decision was not made lightly, and I expect everyone in this courtroom to maintain the highest standards of decorum and respect." Her gaze shifted to Crane, and for just a moment her judicial mask slipped, revealing pure disgust before she composed herself again. "Ms. Stevens, your opening statement." Amanda Stevens stood, buttoned her navy suit jacket, and approached the jury box. She looked each juror in the eye before speaking. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is about a monster who stole 3 days from a 3-year-old child's life. 3 days that should have been filled with chalk drawings and laughter, that instead became a nightmare of darkness and terror. The defendant, Robert Crane, systematically planned and executed the kidnapping of Emma Rodriguez. He constructed a hidden room inside a storage facility specifically for this purpose. He watched her grandmother's house, waited for his opportunity, and snatched Emma from her driveway in broad daylight. Stevens walked slowly, her voice building in intensity. "The defense will try to tell you that Mr. Crane is innocent, that he merely stumbled upon Emma in that storage unit, that he was about to call for help. but the evidence will show you the truth. And if we're very fortunate today, you'll hear the truth from the only person who knows exactly what happened in that room." She paused, her voice softening. Emma Rodriguez is 3 years old. She hasn't spoken a word since her rescue, but today we're going to give her every possible chance to find her voice, because she deserves to be heard, because justice demands it. Stevens returned to her seat as Webb stood for his opening statement, his voice smooth and reasonable. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you've just heard is an emotional appeal, not evidence. My client, Robert Crane, is innocent. He did not kidnap Emma Rodriguez. The prosecution has no eyewitnesses, no video evidence of Mr. Crane taking this child, no confession. What they have is a traumatized child who cannot speak and circumstantial evidence that proves nothing except that my client was in the wrong place at the wrong time." His words washed over the courtroom, but Maria Rodriguez wasn't listening. She was watching the side door, waiting for the moment when her daughter would enter. At 10:15 a.m., Judge Holbrook called a brief recess. "When we reconvene in 15 minutes, the court will hear testimony from Emma Rodriguez. Dr. Chen, is the witness ready?" Dr. Chen's throat was dry. "As ready as she'll ever be, Your Honor." The courtroom emptied partially during the recess, but most people held their seats, unwilling to risk losing them. The tension was unbearable. And then at 10:30 a.m. exactly, the side door opened. The entire courtroom held its breath. Because walking through that door, carrying her daughter, was Maria Rodriguez. Emma's face was pressed against her mother's shoulder, her small body rigid with fear. Behind them, Officer Harrison entered with Rex. The trial of the century was about to begin. And nobody knew if justice would be served or shattered in the silence. The silence in courtroom 6B was so complete that you could hear the air conditioning hum through the vents. 200 people sat frozen, their collective breath held, as Maria Rodriguez carried her daughter down the center aisle. Emma's tiny hands clutched her mother's blouse, her face hidden, her entire 3-year-old body trembling like a leaf in a storm. Judge Holbrook watched with an expression that betrayed nothing, but her hand gripped her gavel so tightly her knuckles had gone white. She was a judge, trained to remain impartial, but she was also a human being watching a traumatized child walk towards something that might break her all over again. Dr. Linda Chen had prepared a special setup near the witness stand, not the intimidating witness box itself, but a small chair with a booster seat positioned at an angle where Emma could see the judge and jury, but didn't have to look directly at Robert Crane. Beside the chair was the designated spot where Rex would sit with Officer Harrison. As Maria approached, Prosecutor Stevens stood slowly, her movements careful and deliberate, as if sudden motion might shatter the fragile moment. "Your Honor, the state calls Emma Rodriguez." The words echoed in the vast courtroom like a bell tolling. Maria reached the witness area and tried to lower Emma into the special chair, but the little girl's grip on her mother's blouse intensified. Her small fingers dug in, refusing to let go. Emma's eyes remained closed, her face still pressed against Maria's shoulder, and a small whimper escaped her lips, the first sound anyone had heard from her in 5 weeks. "It's okay, Mija," Maria whispered, her voice cracking. "Mom is right here. I'm not going anywhere." Dr. Chen moved to Maria's side, her voice gentle and practiced. "Emma, sweetheart, remember what we talked about. You don't have to be scared. Your mama will be right next to you. And look," she gestured to where Harrison stood with Rex, "your special friend Rex is here too." At the mention of Rex's name, Emma's eyes opened. Just slightly, just enough to peek out from her mother's shoulder. The German shepherd sat perfectly still in his official vest, his intelligent eyes focused on Emma with what could only be described as concern. It took another full minute, but eventually, Maria managed to settle Emma into the chair. The little girl sat rigid, her hands gripping the armrests, her eyes darting around the courtroom like a trapped animal looking for escape. She wore a pink dress that Maria had bought special for today, with white tights and small black shoes. She looked impossibly small, impossibly fragile, impossibly young to be carrying the weight of justice on her tiny shoulders. Judge Holbrook leaned forward slightly. "Emma, honey, my name is Judge Holbrook. Nobody here is going to hurt you. We just want to talk to you, okay? You don't have to be scared." Emma's only response was to press herself deeper into the chair, making herself as small as possible. Stevens approached slowly, holding a stuffed rabbit, not Emma's original one which was in evidence, but an identical replacement Dr. Chen had purchased. "Hi, Emma. Do you remember me? My name is Miss Stevens. I'm a friend of your mama's." Nothing. Emma's eyes tracked the rabbit but showed no recognition, no interest, no engagement. Stevens tried again, her voice warm and encouraging. "Emma, we know you've been very brave. You survived something very scary, and now we need your help to make sure the person who scared you can't scare anyone else. Do you understand?" Silence. Emma's breathing had quickened, coming in short, shallow gasps that Dr. Chen recognized as the beginning of a panic response. Stevens pulled out a set of simple picture cards that Dr. Chen had prepared, drawings of a house, a car, a dog, basic images designed to ease Emma into communication. "Can you point to the picture of the dog for me, Emma?" Emma stared at the cards as if they were written in a foreign language. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Stevens tried every technique Dr. Chen had suggested, showing Emma family photos to ground her in safe memories, using a toy telephone to see if Emma would talk through play, even trying simple yes or no questions that Emma could answer with a nod. Nothing worked. Emma sat motionless except for her trembling, her eyes growing more distant with each passing moment, retreating back into that safe place in her mind where the world couldn't hurt her. In the gallery, Maria Rodriguez was crying silently, her mother's arm around her shoulders. They'd known this might happen, but hopping and knowing are different things entirely. Juror number 7 dabbed at her eyes with her tissue. Juror number 3, a man in his 50s, stared at his hands, unable to watch. Even the court reporter seemed to be struggling, her fingers hovering over her stenography machine. And at the defense table, Marcus Webb allowed himself the smallest smile. He'd been taking notes, documenting everything, building his case for appeal, but he could already see where this was going. The child couldn't testify. Without her testimony, his client would walk. It was that simple. 20 minutes into the testimony, Judge Holbrook called for a brief sidebar. Stevens, Webb, and Dr. Chen approached the bench. "Miss Stevens," the judge said quietly, her voice heavy with regret, "this isn't working. We can't traumatize this child further for the sake of legal proceedings. I think we need to." "Please, Your Honor," Stevens interrupted, her voice desperate. "Just a few more minutes. Dr. Chen, is there anything else we can try?" Dr. Chen looked back at Emma, who sat frozen in that chair, her small body rigid with fear and trauma. Then her eyes shifted to Rex, still sitting patiently with Harrison, and she remembered that moment in the hospital, those 5 seconds when Emma had connected with the dog. "Officer Harrison," Dr. Chen called out, "could you bring Rex closer?" Webb objected immediately. "Your Honor, this is exactly the kind of emotional manipulation I warned about. Now they're parading the dog around to tug at heartstrings." "Mr. Webb, sit down," Judge Holbrook snapped, her patience with the defense attorney finally wearing thin. "Dr. Chen, proceed." Harrison gave Rex a quiet command, and the German Shepherd moved slowly, carefully, toward Emma's chair. The courtroom watched in absolute silence as the dog approached the terrified child. Emma's eyes followed Rex's movement. For the first time since entering the courtroom, she showed a flicker of something other than fear, recognition, maybe, or memory of that moment in the hospital when this dog had represented safety. Rex stopped about 3 feet from Emma's chair, close enough to reach but not invasive, not threatening. Harrison had trained him well. The dog sat, his tail giving one small wag, his expression somehow conveying both patience and understanding. Emma stared at Rex. Rex stared back. Dr. Chen knelt beside Emma's chair, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's the one who found you, Emma, remember? When you were scared and alone, Rex found you. He saved you. He's a good boy, isn't he?" Emma's hand moved slightly on the armrest, her fingers flexing as if remembering the feel of Rex's fur. Stevens tried one more time, pulling out drawings that showed a basic timeline, a house, a van, a building. "Emma, can you show me what happened? Can you help us understand?" But Emma's eyes never left Rex. The dog had become her anchor, the only thing in this overwhelming courtroom that made sense, that connected to a moment when she'd been found, been saved, been rescued from darkness. The little girl's mouth opened slightly, as if she was trying to form words. Her lips moved, practicing sounds that wouldn't come. Her breathing quickened again, and Dr. Chen recognized the signs. Emma was trying, desperately trying to speak, but the trauma had her locked in its grip. "It's okay, sweetheart," Dr. Chen whispered. "Take your time, nobody's rushing you." But time was exactly what they didn't have. Judge Holbrook was watching the clock, clearly preparing to call an end to this impossible attempt. Webb was already half standing, ready to make his motion to dismiss the testimony. Maria Rodriguez gripped her rosary so hard the beads cut into her palm, whispering prayers in Spanish that went unheard by everyone except God. And Robert Crane sat at the defense table with that same empty, emotionless expression, watching a 3-year-old child struggle to speak the words that would condemn him. 30 minutes had passed since Emma took her seat. 30 minutes of silence. 30 minutes of failed attempts and growing despair. And then Officer Harrison, watching Emma's eyes fixed on Rex, made a decision. Without waiting for permission, without consulting anyone, he gave Rex a command that wasn't standard procedure, wasn't approved, wasn't anything except a desperate father's instinct to help a suffering child. "Rex," he said quietly, "comfort." The German shepherd moved forward, closing the distance between himself and Emma. And the entire courtroom held its breath one more time. Because sometimes miracles don't come from legal arguments or expert testimony. Sometimes they come from a 3-year-old girl and a police dog who found her in the darkness. Rex moved with the kind of gentle precision that only the best-trained K9s possess. Each step was deliberate, careful, as if he understood that the small human in front of him was broken and needed to be handled like shattered glass. The courtroom had gone so still that the sound of Rex's paws on the polished floor seemed deafening. Officer Harrison's heart hammered in his chest. He'd given the command without authorization, broken protocol in the most public way possible. Judge Holbrook could hold him in contempt. The defense could claim misconduct. His career could end right here, right now. But as he watched Rex approach Emma Rodriguez, he knew he'd made the right choice. Rex stopped directly in front of Emma's chair, close enough that she could touch him if she wanted, far enough that she didn't feel trapped. The German shepherd lowered his head slowly, placing it on Emma's lap with infinite gentleness. His dark eyes looked up at her with something that transcended training. It was empathy, pure and simple. Emma's entire body went rigid. Her small hands, which had been clutching the armrests in white-knuckled terror, began to shake. Dr. Chen watched carefully, ready to intervene if this went wrong, if Rex's presence triggered a panic response instead of the connection they so desperately needed. But then something miraculous happened. Emma's right hand lifted from the armrest. It hovered in the air for a moment, trembling like a hummingbird's wing, suspended between fear and trust. The entire courtroom watched that small hand, hundreds of people focused on the movement of 5 tiny fingers. Slowly, so slowly it seemed to take an eternity, Emma's hand descended toward Rex's head. Her fingers, still shaking, made contact with his fur. Rex remained absolutely motionless, his warm weight steady on her lap, his breathing calm and even. Emma's fingers curled into Rex's thick coat. She gripped his fur like it was a lifeline tossed to a drowning person. Her other hand joined the first, and now she was holding onto Rex with both hands, her small fingers buried in his dark fur. And then the tears came. They started silently, rolling down Emma's cheeks in streams that caught the fluorescent courtroom lights. Her small body began to shake, not with fear this time, but with something deeper, something breaking loose from where it had been trapped inside her for 5 weeks. The dam was cracking, and everything she'd been holding back was beginning to pour out. Maria Rodriguez half stood in the gallery, her own tears flowing freely, her hand pressed to her mouth to stifle the sobs that wanted to escape. Elena gripped her daughter's arm, both women watching the moment unfold with a mixture of hope and terror. Dr. Chen knelt beside Emma's chair, one hand gently on the child's back. "It's okay, sweetheart, let it out, you're safe now." Emma's mouth opened. Her lips formed words that wouldn't come. Her throat worked, trying to push sound past the barrier that trauma had built. She was fighting so hard, struggling against 5 weeks of silence, 5 weeks of protective shutdown, 5 weeks of her mind keeping her locked away from words that hurt too much to speak. Rex pressed his head more firmly into her lap, as if giving her something solid to hold onto while she fought her internal battle. "Good." The sound was barely audible, more breath than word, but it was there. Emma had made a sound. After 5 weeks of absolute silence, Emma Rodriguez had made a sound. The courtroom collectively leaned forward. Jurors gripped their chairs. Judge Holbrook's hand covered her heart. Even the bailiff, a 30-year veteran who'd seen everything, felt his eyes burning with unshed tears. Emma took a shuddering breath, her small chest heaving with the effort. Her fingers tightened in Rex's fur. She looked down at the dog, at his kind eyes and patient expression, at the living embodiment of rescue and safety and hope. "Good boy," she whispered. 2 words, just 2 simple words, but they detonated in courtroom 6B like an emotional bomb. The sound that erupted from the gallery was indescribable, not quite a gasp, not quite a sob, but something in between. Maria Rodriguez collapsed into her mother's arms, weeping with such force that her entire body convulsed. Elena held her daughter and granddaughter in her heart simultaneously, her own tears falling into Maria's hair. Juror number 7 wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. She was openly crying, her hands pressed to her face. Juror number 3 wiped his eyes roughly with his sleeve. Juror number 9, a young woman who'd remained stoic throughout jury selection, covered her mouth as tears streamed down her face. Judge Holbrook reached for the tissue box on her bench, dabbing at her eyes while trying to maintain some semblance of judicial composure. She'd been a judge for 23 years, had heard testimony in murder trials, had watched grieving families collapse in her courtroom. But this moment of a traumatized child finding her voice, broke through every professional barrier she'd built. Even the court reporter's hands shook as she documented the moment, her fingers stumbling over the keys as tears blurred her vision. Amanda Stevens turned away from the courtroom, her shoulders shaking as she pressed her palms against the prosecution table, overcome with relief and grief and hope all tangled together. And at the defense table, Marcus Webb's confident smile had vanished. He sat frozen, pen hovering over his legal pad because he knew, they all knew, that everything had just changed. But it was Robert Crane's reaction that was most telling. For the first time since the trial began, emotion crossed his face. His jaw tightened. His hands clenched into fists under the table. His eyes, previously dead and empty, now burned with something dark and ugly, the rage of a predator watching his prey escape. Dr. Chen's hand remained steady on Emma's back as the little girl continued to cry, continued to hold Rex like he was the only solid thing in a world that had tilted sideways. "You're doing so good, Emma. So good. Can you tell us what happened? Can you help us understand?" Emma lifted her face from Rex's fur. Her cheeks were wet with tears, her eyes red and swollen. But for the first time in 5 weeks, those eyes were present. They were here now in this moment. Emma Rodriguez had come back from wherever trauma had hidden her. "The bad man," she whispered, her voice small but clear in the silent courtroom. "The bad man took me." Stevens spun around, her eyes wide. Judge Holbrook leaned forward. The jury sat transfixed. "Can you show me the bad man, Emma?" Dr. Chen asked gently. "Is he in this room?" Emma's hands tightened in Rex's fur, drawing strength from the dog's solid presence. Slowly, terribly, her head turned. Her eyes scanned the courtroom, moving past the jury, past the judge, past the gallery. And then they landed on Robert Crane. Emma's entire body went rigid with recognition and fear. A small sound escaped her throat, not quite a scream, but close. Rex shifted slightly, pressing closer to her, providing comfort through his presence. "Him," Emma whispered, her small finger pointing directly at Crane. "The bad man, he hurted me." The grammatically imperfect sentence, hurted instead of hurt, only underscored how young she was, how small, how impossibly brave. Crane's mask finally cracked completely. He half stood, his lawyer grabbing his arm to pull him back down, but not before the entire courtroom saw the fury on his face, the rage at being identified, the hatred for this child who dared to speak. "That's a lie," he shouted, his voice echoing off the walls. "She's lying, she's—" Judge Holbrook's gavel came down like thunder. "Mr. Crane, sit down. One more outburst and you'll be removed from this courtroom." But the damage, or rather, the truth, was out there now. The jury had seen Crane's reaction, had heard his rage, had witnessed the transformation from calm defendant to exposed predator. Emma buried her face in Rex's fur again, sobbing, but she'd done it. She'd spoken. She'd identified her abductor. And slowly, with Dr. Chen's gentle guidance and Rex's steady presence, she began to talk. The words came haltingly, imperfectly, in the simple vocabulary of a 3-year-old. She talked about the bad man's van and the dark room and being so scared. She talked about being hungry and cold and crying for her mama. Each word was another nail in Robert Crane's coffin, another piece of testimony that demolished his defense. It took an hour of tears and trembling and Rex never leaving her side, an hour of the bravest testimony Judge Holbrook had ever witnessed. When it was finally over, when Emma had told everything her 3-year-old mind could express, Maria was allowed to scoop her daughter into her arms. Emma clung to her mother, exhausted and drained, but free from the silence that had imprisoned her. As they carried Emma from the courtroom, the little girl reached out one hand toward Rex. "Good boy," she said again, her voice stronger now. "Good boy, Rex, thank you." Officer Harrison's vision blurred as he watched them go, Rex's tail wagging slowly beside him. Because sometimes justice doesn't come from evidence or arguments. Sometimes it comes from 2 words spoken by the smallest voice in the room. And sometimes those 2 words change everything. The jury deliberation lasted exactly 47 minutes. In the history of Maricopa County Superior Court, few verdicts had come back so quickly in such a high-profile case. When the bailiff announced that the jury had reached a decision, the courtroom filled within minutes, people rushing back from coffee breaks and restroom visits, nobody wanting to miss this moment. Emma wasn't there. Dr. Chen and Maria had taken her home after her testimony, knowing that the 3-year-old had given everything she had and asking for more would be cruel. But her words echoed in everyone's minds, replaying like a recording that couldn't be stopped. "The bad man. He hurted me." Judge Holbrook entered, her expression grave and controlled. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" The jury foreman, a retired teacher named William Martinez, stood. His hands trembled slightly as he held the verdict form. "We have, Your Honor. In the matter of the state of Arizona versus Robert James Crane, on the charge of kidnapping in the 1st degree, how do you find?" "Guilty, Your Honor." The courtroom erupted. People cheered, cried, embraced strangers sitting next to them. Purple ribbons waved in the air like victory flags. Maria Rodriguez collapsed in her mother's arms, her sobs of relief echoing through the chaos. Judge Holbrook's gavel cracked repeatedly. "Order! I will have order in this courtroom." But even she couldn't completely hide the small smile that tugged at the corner of her mouth. The foreman continued through all charges: aggravated assault on a minor, unlawful imprisonment, multiple counts of child abuse. Guilty, guilty, guilty. Each word landed like a hammer blow, each verdict another piece of justice for Emma Rodriguez. Robert Crane sat motionless at the defense table, his face pale, his earlier rage replaced by the hollow expression of a man watching his life end. Marcus Webb gathered his files mechanically, already composing appeal arguments in his mind, but they both knew the truth. With Emma's testimony, with Crane's outburst, with the physical evidence all aligning, those appeals would go nowhere. Sentencing came 3 weeks later, on a crisp December morning. Judge Holbrook had reviewed hundreds of pages of victim impact statements, psychological evaluations, and expert testimonies. She'd barely slept, knowing that her words today would echo for years in legal precedents and law school textbooks. Robert Crane stood before her in an orange jumpsuit, shackled and diminished. Gone was the expensive suit, the facade of respectability. Now he was just what he'd always been, a predator in a cage. "Mr. Crane," Judge Holbrook began, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "In my 23 years on the bench, I have never encountered a case that more clearly demanded the maximum penalty allowed under law. You stole innocence. You inflicted trauma that will echo through a child's entire life. You showed no remorse, no humanity, no recognition of the suffering you caused." She paused, her eyes boring into him like lasers. "On the charge of kidnapping in the first degree, I sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole. On the charges of aggravated assault and child abuse, I sentence you to consecutive terms totaling an additional 40 years. You will never walk free again, Mr. Crane. You will never have the opportunity to hurt another child. Justice, delayed by your victim's trauma, has finally been served." The gavel fell with finality. Robert Crane was led away, and he would spend the rest of his life in a maximum security prison in Florence, Arizona. The other inmates, many of whom had children of their own, made sure his stay was particularly unpleasant. But that's a different story. For Emma Rodriguez, justice was only the beginning of healing. The months that followed were filled with therapy sessions, good days and bad days, progress and setbacks. Dr. Chen worked with Emma twice a week, using play therapy and art therapy and every tool in her psychological arsenal. Maria reduced her hours at the hospital to spend more time with her daughter, and Alina moved in permanently to help. But the most remarkable part of Emma's healing came from an unexpected source. Officer Jake Harrison had tried to return to regular duty after the trial, but he couldn't stop thinking about Emma. He'd seen her at her worst moment and watched her find her voice. 2 weeks after the sentencing, he made a request to his captain. Could he and Rex visit Emma regularly as part of a therapy program? The Phoenix Police Department, recognizing the public relations gold mine and genuine good this could do, approved immediately. Thus began a partnership that would last years. Every other Saturday, Harrison and Rex would arrive at the Rodriguez home. At first, Emma would just sit with Rex, her small hands buried in his fur, finding comfort in his presence. But as weeks turned into months, she began to play, throwing tennis balls for Rex to fetch, teaching him tricks he already knew, giggling when he licked her face. 6 months after the trial, Emma spoke her first full sentence without prompting. "Rex is my best friend." Maria cried happy tears for the first time in what felt like forever. 1 year after her rescue, Emma started preschool. She still had nightmares sometimes, still saw Dr. Chen for therapy, still had moments when the trauma would surface unexpectedly. But she was laughing again, playing again, being a child again. The Phoenix Police Department, seeing the impact Rex had on Emma's recovery, launched a formal therapy dog program. Rex became the model, and soon other K-9 officers were being trained for similar work with trauma victims. The program would eventually help hundreds of children across Arizona. But Emma remained special to Rex and Harrison. They never missed their Saturday visits. 2 years after the trial, the Arizona K-9 Memorial Ceremony honored Rex for his years of service. He was 8 years old now, approaching retirement age for police dogs. The department planned to retire him with full honors, and Harrison had already filed the paperwork to adopt him permanently. The ceremony was held at the state capitol, with hundreds of officers, their K-9 partners, and community members in attendance. Speeches were made, awards were given, and then a special moment was announced. "We have one more presentation today," the ceremony coordinator said into the microphone. "A very special one." From the side of the stage, Maria Rodriguez appeared, holding the hand of a healthy, smiling 5-year-old Emma. The little girl wore a purple dress, her favorite color now, and carried something wrapped in tissue paper. The crowd parted as Emma walked toward where Rex sat with Harrison, the German shepherd's tail wagging at the sight of his special friend. Emma knelt beside Rex, no fear, no hesitation, just pure love. "I made you something," Emma said clearly, her voice confident and strong. She unwrapped the tissue paper to reveal a medal she'd crafted with her mother's help, construction paper and glitter and ribbon, a 5-year-old's masterpiece. On it, written in careful letters that Maria had helped her form, were the words, "Rex, my hero." Emma placed the homemade medal around Rex's neck with ceremony befitting a military honor. Then she threw her arms around the dog, hugging him tightly. "Good boy," she whispered, loud enough for the microphone to catch. "Such a good boy, Rex, you saved me." Rex licked her face, his tail wagging furiously, and Emma giggled, that pure, uninhibited sound of a child who had survived darkness and found her way back to light. The crowd erupted in applause. Officers wiped their eyes. Even hardened detectives who'd seen it all found themselves reaching for tissues. Officer Harrison knelt beside Emma and Rex, one hand on his partner, one hand on the little girl's shoulder. "No, Emma," he said softly. "You saved yourself. Rex and I just helped you find your voice." Emma looked up at him with those bright brown eyes that had once been hollow and vacant, now sparkling with life and joy. "We saved each other," she said with the simple wisdom that sometimes only children possess. As the sun set over Phoenix that evening, as the ceremony ended and people drifted away, Emma sat on the Capitol steps with Rex's head in her lap, Maria and Alina beside her, Officer Harrison nearby. They watched the sky turn orange and pink, and Emma talked about school, about her friends, about what she wanted to be when she grew up, a veterinarian who works with police dogs naturally. She talked and talked and talked, her voice carrying on the evening breeze, each word a victory over the silence that had once imprisoned her. Because sometimes the smallest voices speak the loudest truths. Sometimes 2 words, "good boy," can shatter darkness and let the light back in. And sometimes justice and healing walk on 4 paws, wearing a K-9 vest, with a heart bigger than anyone expected. Emma Rodriguez had survived. She had spoken, she had healed. And she would never be silent again. The end.